If a man tells you, "I'll marry you if you're still single at 30," would you believe in such a bottom-line oath? Once upon a time, I believed wholeheartedly because the one uttering those words was Colin. We were the legendary childhood sweethearts, accompanying each other since middle school. I remember the year we graduated from high school, our classmates teased us to be together. Colin said, "Sarah, if you don't have a boyfriend by the time you're 30, I've got you covered, okay?" Upon graduating from college, he reiterated the old saying, "Sarah, if you're not married by 30, I'll marry you." Back then, I was full of anticipation for 30. However, before reaching 30, Colin got married, marrying a rich and beautiful woman. And my youth, in that moment, came to an end. The first time I met Colin was at his family's rental house. I was 14 years old that year, admitted to the school through special enrollment due to excellent grades, as my parents worked there. To facilitate my education, my parents reluctantly rented a house owned by Colin's family. Colin's mother was a teacher at the school, and their family had just bought a new property. The head of the school intervened, allowing her to sublet the house to us. Despite this, Colin's mother was still unwilling, constantly emphasizing how precious the house was. She even mentioned that it was because of her consideration for your family's daughter that she rented it to us. As she spoke, she turned to criticize Colin. "Look at how hard others work. Even without their parents around, they still managed to rank first and win the provincial math competition first prize." Under Colin's mother's nagging, I learned that the boy in sportswear in front of me was my classmate. I smiled awkwardly at him, and he immediately turned away, looking disdainful. My first impression of Colin wasn't great, he was too arrogant. However, deep down, I couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for him. His mother was a teacher, his father owned a company, while my parents were just temporary workers in the school cafeteria. The contrast between us was like night and day. After signing the lease agreement, Colin's mom brought over a big bag of clothes, saying they could be worn by both my younger brother and me. That night, my mom handed me the school uniform, saying, "The teacher mentioned that your brother has grown taller, and we need to buy new uniforms for the upcoming school year. These two sets fit you perfectly, so we don't have to spend money on new ones." Thinking about Colin's judgmental gaze, I felt a bit resistant, but I also knew that my parents were doing their best to provide us with an education. After the school year started, Colin and I were in the same class, and he was the class monitor. Handsome, academically successful, and from a well-known family, boys like him always drew attention. Every time class ended, a crowd would gather around his desk. One time, I faintly heard my name, followed by laughter. The next day, as I went to the restroom, two girls intercepted me. They quickly opened my collar, and one of them loudly exclaimed, "Oh my, Sarah's uniform really belongs to Colin." That's when I realized that the uniforms had names inside, and some classmates had already figured out that I was wearing Colin's uniform. As a transfer student, and the only one exempt from entrance exams, many students already disliked me, eagerly anticipating how I would embarrass myself. In no time, the entire class knew that not only did I live in Colin's house, but I also wore his uniform. Some girls mocked me for being shameless. I couldn't defend myself, and chaos ensued. Someone must have gone to the playground to fetch Colin, who was playing ball. He entered the classroom, glanced at me, and said, "Sarah is my cousin. She lives in my house and wears my uniform. It's none of your business. If anyone brings this up again, don't blame me for not being polite." Even though Colin's explanation got me out of trouble, I truly resented him. After all, the details about renting his house and wearing his uniform were known only to him. After that incident, my relationship with Colin turned icy. Where I was, he wasn't, and vice versa. I put an extra effort to surpass him. When the results of the first monthly exam came out, I secured the top spot, beating Colin by a solid 10 points. Classmates joked that I was Colin's nemesis. Before my arrival, he was the undefeated general, but now he had become the perennial second place. Colin seemed indifferent to academics, always maintaining a nonchalant attitude. His interests were diverse: basketball, guitar, singing. He excelled in everything. Even if I didn't come in first, he remained the most dazzling youth in the crowd. This fueled my envy. In his eyes, I might not even be considered competition. He would often bring a group of guys to the window where my parents worked, claiming to be taking care of our family business. God knows how much I despised his actions, feeling like he was rubbing my self-respect into the ground. I dreamt of the day when I could trample all of this back down. The opportunity came unexpectedly. That day, my mom prepared some local specialties for me to take to Colin's family. Just as I reached their doorstep, I heard people arguing. It seemed like Colin's dad was having an affair, and they were going through a divorce. In that moment, I was profoundly shocked, only snapping back to reality when I heard Colin's voice behind me. Surprisingly, he wasn't angry about me eavesdropping. He casually remarked, "Well, it's good. Now it's not just my secret anymore." Contrary to feeling schadenfreude, I wasn't rejoicing. Instead, I felt a subtle sadness deep within. That day, Colin, breaking the norm, asked me to accompany him for a walk on the playground. After walking for an unknown distance, he suddenly said, "Sarah, I envy you." I retorted, not in the best mood, "Envy me for being poor? Can't even afford to buy a school uniform." He replied, "But your family is warm. Your parents always have smiles on their faces, and they've never pressured you to come first in class." Looking at the melancholy expression on his face, I didn't know how to comfort him. In the end, I blurted out, "Happy families are all alike, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." Surprisingly, we both laughed. It turns out that even the seemingly indifferent yearn for friendship more than anyone else. I tacitly kept Colin's secret. After that, he often sought me out for conversations, discussing his parents and his troubles. In my youth, I thought he was exaggerating his woes. What impact could his parents' divorce have on him? Everyone was eager to be kind to him, and he had an endless supply of pocket money. It was unlike my situation. I couldn't even afford to join the school-organized spring outing because it required purchasing tickets and meal vouchers together. I didn't want to ask my parents for money. When we returned from the spring outing, the teacher assigned a reflective essay, and Colin took the lead in opposing it, shouting, "Teacher, writing about the spring outing every year is so repetitive. Can we have a different topic?" Later, I found out that Colin, in his own way, was protecting my meager sense of self-esteem. In gratitude for Colin's intervention, our home became his makeshift cafeteria for the next week. My parents liked Colin, praising his maturity. Colin, in turn, enjoyed chatting with my parents about everyday life, describing it as the normal family he wished for. Once, he said to me with profound sadness, "Sarah, I really want to exchange lives with you." It was probably this statement that secretly stirred my emotions. A youth so bright, yet so melancholic. In my seemingly humble life, there were aspects worthy of his envy. After the high school entrance exams, we both got into the same prestigious high school and became classmates once again. During class placement, I could have been placed in the advanced class, but at that time, the advanced class required students to take online classes benchmarked against Beijing schools. In an era when computers weren't widely accessible, each student needed to be given an account and password to attend classes in the school computer room. At that time, my parents had resigned from the school cafeteria and opened a fast food restaurant. We couldn't afford the 5,000 yuan for the online classes. According to the regulations, I was supposed to be placed in the regular class. When Colin found out, he immediately brought the money. I burst into tears, unsure of what to do. Seeing me cry, Colin seemed a bit overwhelmed and said, "Why are you crying? It's not like you won't pay it back. If you can't repay it, we can consider another form of repayment." He didn't realize the impact those words, "another form of repayment," had on me. I cried even harder. Colin quickly added, all right, just kidding. This is my New Year's gift money. No one knows about it. You don't have to pay it back, it's okay." I repaid Colin's money 6 months later. Our family's fast food restaurant was gradually stabilizing, and my parents were no longer as financially strained. Despite the improvement, whenever Colin got something good, he always thought of bringing me a share. Even the gifts his dad brought back from a business trip to Hong Kong, Colin would split them with me. Some classmates started speculating whether we were in a romantic relationship. He quickly shook his head and said, "Sarah is my cousin." Over the years, I became his closest confidant under the guise of being his cousin. We comforted each other, sharing everything. Colin always said that I was his most important person. During our university years, Colin and I were in the same city but attended different schools. Every weekend, he would take me out to improve our lives. My first experience with Western cuisine, my first time watching a play, my first trip, all sponsored by Colin. My college roommates once thought he was my boyfriend, but I quickly denied it, saying he was my cousin. Occasionally, when girls pursued him, he would pull me out to act as a shield. He said he wouldn't consider personal matters until he turned 30. After graduating from college, I landed a job in a government department in Changsha, while Colin joined a startup in Beijing. He wanted to take the opportunity to venture into a big city while still young. In my first month's salary, I used the entire amount to buy Colin a gift, a Tissot watch. In return, Colin gifted me a set of high-end skincare products. We often chatted on WeChat, sharing our lives. Most of the time, I served as his emotional dumping ground. When his projects went south, he got scolded by his boss, faced office politics, or his mom urged him to return to Changsha, he would immediately come to me to vent. Every time Colin returned to Changsha, I would go to the airport to pick him up, and the first meal after landing was always at my home. Perhaps because we were too familiar, my parents never thought that we would be together. To them, Colin was a bit like their honorary son. When Colin went to Beijing, my parents would remind me to send him local specialties. The gifts he brought back to my parents in Changsha were more thoughtful than the ones for his own parents. One year during the Chinese New Year, at a high school reunion, friends teased us, saying that we had been together for so many years but never gave each other a formal title. Colin casually placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "Sarah and I are too familiar, we can't spark any romance. If she's still unmarried by the time she's 30, I'll marry her." And there I was, inexplicably blushing. In that moment, I couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to be with him, a dreamy notion. Colin's mom was the first person to see that there would be no romantic outcome between Colin and me. In high school, where we were inseparable, school teachers would ask her if she was worried about her son starting a relationship. She shook her head like a tambourine and said, "My son has high standards. Sarah is a good girl, but her family conditions are too poor for him to be interested." After I got into college and our family's financial situation improved, with my parents buying a house and settling down in Changsha, Colin's mom still asked, "Sarah, where are your parents working now?" She would even pack clothes that she and Colin couldn't wear and give them to me to take home. I felt awkward and didn't know how to respond. However, I also sensitively perceived the condescending attitude in Colin's mom's eyes. This made it even clearer to me that the distance between Colin and me was vast. So, did I have feelings for Colin? The answer is undoubtedly yes. I liked his excellence and self-discipline, his bravery in standing up for me, and his openness in sharing secrets with me. My diary was once filled with every little detail about him. The feeling of love, too difficult to express, I believe, will not happen again in this lifetime. Did Colin have feelings for me? I think, probably not. Since high school, he had always said that after chatting with me, he felt energized. He once said, "Sarah, you're like the charger of my life." At our high school graduation party, classmates teased us, and he said, "Sarah and I, we are best suited as friends. Romance is too commonplace." However, his agreement about marrying me if I was still unmarried by the age of 30 filled me with countless hopes. So, in the message book I gave Colin, I wrote, "You are the joy of my youth." At that moment, it was probably the closest we got to love, because I hoped that one day, he would understand the meaning behind that sentence. The young man I liked is you. Even the best of friends sometimes drift apart. Ever since Colin officially announced his romantic relationship on social media, we began to naturally draw boundaries. We no longer had daily video calls, and our conversations dwindled. I forced myself not to pay attention to his updates. Occasionally, in our class group, other classmates would mention us, saying it was a pity we weren't together. I could only use the phrase, "We have always been good friends," to repeatedly clarify our relationship. For a while, Colin mentioned feeling immense pressure in Beijing and expressed confusion about the future. Later, his social media posts started featuring ambiguous sentences, each hinting at the excitement of falling in love. However, he no longer shared these feelings with me. I knew our friendship had expired. Later on, Colin revealed pictures of his girlfriend, stating that they were in a relationship with the intention of getting married. The romantic and sweet tone was something I had never witnessed before. I didn't even have the right to ask questions, considering we had never been in a romantic relationship. Occasionally, I would find myself questioning whether the companionship and promises throughout our journey were all fake. It wasn't until I saw Colin earnestly responding to discussions about his relationship in our class group that I suddenly felt relieved. This cautious and delicate tone revealed to me that this is how a man expresses his feelings towards a woman he likes. Men often make promises thoughtlessly at an age when they don't understand love, not out of love but out of the fear of losing a friend like you. Before Colin got married, he called me and said, "Sarah, I'm getting married. You should hurry too. The young man who once called love vulgar finally found true love at the age of 27. I suddenly chuckled, tears streaming down my face. At 27, I finally understood that the young Colin from our earlier days was indeed my first experience of love. As for me, I was nothing more than the hero of his youthful idealism. Boys like him, bearing the scars of their original families, during those times either played carelessly or were bursting with a sense of justice. In contrast, his weak and vulnerable presence was full of protectiveness. Fortunately, at that time, I was even more fragile and insecure than he was. Regrettably, there was never any love from him towards me. And time didn't elevate our relationship from sympathy and friendship to love. This is my story with Colin. Met at 14, spent 13 years together, our connection transcending friendship but falling short of love. The woman Colin married is entirely different from me. Whether in appearance, perspective, or family background, we exist in different worlds. The companionship between us is genuine, and the lasting affection is real. However, those words about turning 30, you unmarried, me marrying you, were not a promise but a boundary between sympathy and bravado. I once asked myself, if I had been more confident in my youth, would the outcome have changed? As the days passed and youth halted with the news of his marriage, I began to understand that this seemingly romantic tale was always a battle fought by me alone. And now, I've decided to make peace with myself. No regrets. Loving you as a proud yet lacking youth was gratifying. After letting go, I've decided to meet the composed and open-minded version of myself.